the purpose of this series, and this is the second in a series of lunch and learns that we've been putting together, is to discuss, Dynamics GP, the application probably you all know very well, and what some of the transaction windows that are in Dynamics GP look like in Business Central. Now, Business Central is a cloud software as a service, fully cloud version of Microsoft's ERP software. So it doesn't require any servers. It doesn't require, it's a fully standalone application. So it has a lot of value there in the fact that you can stand up a new version of Business Central without having to buy new servers. And when you think about it over the long term, you don't have to update the application. You can kind of upgrades itself. You do upgrade the application, but it upgrades itself. When your servers run to the end of their useful life, there's nothing to do on the cloud-based application. It kind of just handles it. So we're going to look at a couple screens in Dynamics GP that you should be pretty familiar with. So we're going to look at the Payables transaction entry window. We're going to look at the purchase order entry window. And then in Business Central, we're going to look at the purchase invoice window, which is really the same thing as Dynamics GP's Payables transaction entry window. And then we'll also look at the purchase order window, and we'll talk a little bit about approvals. And then after this, the rest of the presentation is going to be a demo. So I'll be in the software at that point. So we're going to start with Dynamics GP. And we'll start with the Payables transaction entry window. So this window should look fairly familiar in the sense that it is a window that lots of transactions go through in Dynamics GP, and it captures some basic information about who the vendor is, what address you want to send the check to, what their currency is, what the vendor's invoice number is, and some other information, but most importantly, how much the vendor's invoice is for. And then if we go into the next screen, it'll capture some information about how this particular transaction is going to impact your general ledger. So here we have, pretty simple distribution in that it goes to one or a few accounts and then goes to accounts payable, as you'd expect these type of transactions to go to. And then I'm also going to open up the purchase order window, which is pretty similar to what you see in the Payables transaction entry window, but it has some more other information about, it's more line item centric, whereas the Payables transaction window is it's more document centric. So any questions about Dynamics GP? I think these screens should be something you've seen a lot of, and then we'll kind of assimilate what you see here to what you're going to see in BC in just a moment. Let's go into the purchase invoice window, which is basically the same thing as the Dynamics GP Payables transaction entry window. So I have one at the bottom that I created just for the purpose of this discussion. So just like Dynamics GP, you will see a lot of the same information. So you'll have a vendor, you'll have dates about how it's going to, when it's going to, what it's due, what the date of the invoice is, what the vendor's invoice number is, much of the same information you saw in Dynamics GP. And then in the same window, but in the scrolling section, you will distribute this transaction to one of many accounts, just like in Dynamics GP. In the case of this example, I only am going to one account here. And then just to kind of show you how this will look when we go to the ledger, it's going to look just like the other transaction looked in Dynamics GP. Again, these screens, they look different, but oh, whoops, I got to put a vendor invoice number in. These screens, they look different, but they really do this. So I'm just previewing how this transaction is going to hit the general ledger. And just like you'd expect, this transaction is going to debit some expense and it's going to credit accounts payable. So at the end of the day, we're really talking about the same transaction. Like I said, it looks different, but it accomplishes the same functional goal. All right, and then I'm going to leave. And I'm going to go into the purchase invoice, the purchase order window to show you that it's pretty similar also. So here is, in this case, I used the same vendor for both transactions. So here you have a purchase order. It looks pretty similar to what you saw before. And the only difference is on the purchase order, you can do a few different things, right? You can distribute the line item could be an item, like it's going to buy, you want to buy something for inventory, or it could be any one of these item types, a fixed asset, a resource, an item, a GL account. In the example I'm going to give here, I'm just going to show with a GL account. So you could, buy something via purchase order, you could debit some expense, and when you ultimately process this transaction as a purchase invoice, it'll credit accounts payable. And really what I'm just trying to point out is, while these applications look very different, functionally they accomplish the exact same transactional goals. Now, I realize that the screens look very different, but they're not that different really when it comes down to it. This window has a vendor number and it's a name, a document date. Basically, all of the same fields are available here as they are there. Now, there might be a field that's not available, but it's unlikely. So that's really the purpose of these discussions to do exactly that, is to just familiarize the Dynamics GP user base with what screens look like in BC as they are in GP. So just going back through what I just showed you. When we were in Dynamics GP, we looked at payables, transaction entry, and purchase order entry. When we were in Business Central, we looked at purchase invoices, purchase orders, and we didn't look at approvals, but I'll just speak to that. So one of the real nice features of Business Central is it has a online approval process that's baked right into the software, that you could submit a purchase invoice or a purchase order for approval. And there's a pretty nice method to do that if that is applicable to what your organization needs to do. And then I demoed all four of those features.